that, I invite the other two presenters to come up, and we have time for questions. I think we have about 10 minutes. So I found this to be a fascinating foray into some of the new technologies for delivering and packaging. Brent, I appreciated the pluses and minuses.
Thanks.
I think we're all faced with really looking at some of those issues. I wonder if the others two might kind of raise some of the barriers in the systems part and the packaging, just to highlight them so people can
Sure.
think about those barriers.
I mean, I think one of the key barriers for both organizational and technological innovations is scale. So when you've got a very large, long supply chain that's vertically integrated, you've got a different kind of governance in functioning than you do with a small supply chain with independent businesses in it. And dealing with the governance issues, how do you come to agreement? How do you make decisions? How do you share risk and reward? That's going to be across the board issue, whether it's a technological or an organizational innovation.
Yeah, I think one of the big barriers when we talk about packaging is really understanding the entire value chain. And consumers need, for example, the consume within and time temperature indicators. They need to know when their food's going to go bad. But in the value chain before that, or the supply chain before that, there are other needs. And one of the neat things about technology, and we heard from blockchain earlier, and that's an example of a technology that we can use to integrate the whole system. Something simple like QR codes or traceability technology that we have out there is also a way where we can integrate that whole system. One of the neatest examples, I think, to fight that barrier is I'm from Minnesota, and so Cub Foods knows exactly what I purchase, which is cool. But they also know then the expiration dates. They also know all these other information. So linking that to what I need is really important, and then linking that information from the retailer back to a potential producer who's got a recall is really important. And we have that technology now. We just need to connect it. And so making that one of the big barriers is how to connect all that technology.
Great, thanks. Other questions? And if you'd please step to the mic and introduce yourself and your organization or where you're from.
Hi, I'm Kate Clancy, and I want to ask Michelle about some work that we did in the EFSNI project around distribution. And it's the work that Michael Connard and Human Saberi did on developing a whole set of algorithms, which I don't think have ever been developed before, to look at the zones that occur inside of a SMA. And we did it for 5 of the cities in the EFSNI project. And what they looked at was multiple data sets, and they developed the algorithms that allowed them to parse what we used to just call a peri-urban area into 4 different zones. And then you had the urban center, and you also had a clearly rural zone when you get down with all the algorithms. But what they did is they populated each zone with all the known on the ground farms, warehouses, retailers, and in some cases other parts of supply chains. And it seems to me that using that kind of information could be really useful. I really went immediately to thinking about the usefulness of their pointing out how many empty warehouses there are in all of the zones except the rural zones. And I know it's very expensive to refurbish them so that they can be used for production, for processing, but not so much for wholesaling, et cetera. So I'm just thinking of, in terms of last mile and the transportation, it seems to me that this whole infrastructure of where all the parts of the supply chain is another part of that.
Yes.
And I want you to think about how you might think about using some of that data, or some not our data per se, but the fact that you can now do this with their methods to figure out what's available in any MSA to do this kind of planning.
Well, and who will pay for that, right? Is that a governmental function or is it a private sector function? I think that's been a big issue, is who do we go to do this kind of detailed planning that would make good use of existing infrastructure and indicate where the infrastructure needs to be to make the whole system more efficient and diversified.
So does it all sit at the public level, or some of it at a private level at this point? Do we have any examples, do we know?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of.
Thanks. Good question.
Hi, Naomi Fukugawa. A question for Brent. In terms of knowing the issues that we now face with respect to socialization and working together, if you were to get to the point of having so many independent self-driving vehicles and drone delivery, then you end up in a society, perhaps people being isolated and not interacting in an interpersonal level. So what would the impact of that be? Or are there studies that have demonstrated that? Because we all believe that the technology that we have today has created some of the issues we have with respect to interpersonal interactions, respect, communication, human to human.
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question. So, there is an abundance of literature out there from psychology showing the negative, both mental and physical health outcomes related to isolation. In terms of the causal link with technology, I'm not sure if the statistical, causality has been established yet, but it at least seems to be playing some variety of a role in facilitating separating people away from each other. I guess in thinking about that in relation to distribution technologies, I want to emphasize that tension between displacement and reinstatement effects in employment, though. So I think another really good example of that is something like the spreadsheet. So before the spreadsheet, right, you used to have a lot of people who were employed in offices doing math calculations. Spreadsheets obviously made those jobs no longer needed, but created entirely new fields, such as fields of analytics and data analysis, and frankly a lot of the things we do in this room. And so it's definitely hard thinking speculatively about the future, because it seems like new occupations, new markets always end up existing. Humans do end up finding things to do with ourselves. So it's
Yeah, if I just may interject, I think that's a good point, that we don't know what will happen in the future. I, for example, talk to my Roomba, and so it doesn't respond back, but that doesn't mean that somebody in your area of discipline couldn't make it respond back and say, So I think it could create some type of interaction, and maybe you would have the face of a delivery person who's remotely interact. There's potential with technology. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's no, that's a great point.
Okay, why don't we?
Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith. I'm with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments here in D.C. We're the MPO for D.C., suburban Maryland, and Northern Virginia. We've actually been trying to use some of Michelle's work to operationalize some of this information on freight, and we have a local food distribution work group. We've really been trying to figure out, how does this interface with our freight subcommittee? One of the things that MPOs do is a lot of transportation planning, as you can imagine. So selfishly, if the three of you will be in DC again at once, I would love to have you come and repeat all of this for our freight subcommittee. And thank you for just an incredible conference so far. But my question, I think, is really for Michelle. You mentioned quickly building support for building public policy support for resilience, and I just wanted to see if you could expand on that a little bit in the context of food.
Sure. So one of the things that private supply chains have, especially the large ones have, is that they have access to data and data analytics that smaller supply chains don't have access to. And I think that's something that government has a role to play in providing that kind of support. AMS did that in the past with the help of ERS, I understand. And that kind of information is critical, not only for understanding logistics efficiencies, but also to understand emergency food situations. So, for instance, when there is some kind of a disruptive weather event, we don't know how much food we have on hand or where it is. We have no idea because all that data is privatized. We had submitted a proposal to work on some of this to NSF and decided, well, we really need to purchase the data because you can purchase the data. It's just really expensive. And so that definitely put a boundary on the research, just trying to come up with a data purchase that we could afford to ask for. So I think that's a really key piece.
Okay, we have, I'm going to go to this side, and we have 10 seconds. So speak really fast.
Yeah, just a real quick question for Brent. Quentin Reed from Succinct, by the way. And my question is, it seems like the biggest gain you could get by replacing the last mile, individual round trips, more so than replacing the type of vehicle, is by, combining the delivery so that many customers can be serviced with one trip. But that doesn't really seem like it's compatible with this instant on-demand, the moment you order it, a drone is dispatched to send one person their food. So how do you reconcile those two things?
I'm really glad you brought that up because that's a really critical tension that's going to be involved in e-commerce. And I presented those statistics on conventional grocery home delivery ranging from like 18 to 87%. I want to note that the 18% reduction was when orders were delivered on sort of 1 hour time intervals from the store. There were multiple orders grouped together if relevant, but not always. The 87% reduction was a once a week grocery delivery to a predetermined location. So you could optimize, the company could optimize its route fully. So, there are still gains to be had, but yeah, this sort of instant, separated deliveries can really eat into emissions reductions or potentially offset them in a really bad scenario. So.
I see this Amazon Prime versus standard delivery looming its head. I'm afraid we're going to have to stop now, but there will be more discussion at 3 o'clock when we come back. And oh, it's not 3. It is almost 3. What are we supposed to do now? We're supposed to take a break? At 3. Okay.